This will be my last staff do, because I'm not standing next May. Some of you say, oh, thank God for that. But I will miss it, but then again, I think I've done enough, and just see a new leader for the council and see where that person wants to take us. But you know, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the main thing about it is about the achievements, what we've achieved as a city. You know, nobody can take that away from us, and that's all down to you. And I think it's something to do with the policies that we put in, and of course my friend here on the right, Kareem, who's made a lot of that possible, because he's very good at his job.
I've never heard him say that before.
Eh?
I've never heard him say that before.
But you know, I will miss it. Unless any of you next year want to invite me on the side as your guest, like, you know, I mean, I can come along then. But no. I really would like to thank you all for everything you've done and continue to do on a daily basis. All unsung heroes.
It's a good opportunity, actually, for us to say thanks to you, Pete, and to actually pay tribute to what you've achieved. Your judgment has been fantastic. You appointed me as your chief exec. Very good. You've been hard work.
I hope I've left the place a better place than when I first came here. I think I have personally. I got no regrets on any decisions I've made. You know, and it's still a lovely city. I was born and bred here, and it's a lovely place to live, work, drink, and do all sorts of things. And you know, a lot of it's down to all you people. You know, thank you very much.
The city's gone
It's only tea.
The city's gone from strength to strength. I think the staff have always appreciated your candour and your sense of humour. You don't suffer fools, but at the same time you've got a generosity of spirit, and we love the fun that you create and working for you. And I think generally people enjoy coming to work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and that says a lot.
And one thing I'm really looking forward to is all this political crackness. I don't have to watch what I say. I don't have to watch what I say in front of and all these things, because I won't be here. What can you say? You can put that in, don't worry. But I mean, it's going to be fantastic, because I'll just be as I was. And, you know, I can't even speak sometimes. Peter, you shouldn't say that.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. If you let me say a few words really on behalf of the staff. And that was a fine tribute, that video, because I think it reminded us of all the things that we've been doing, and sometimes we forget. And I think it's a message really to all of you politicians that, you know, there's things about legacy. And you sit in the Guildhall building and you look at the names, and we all take pride in the legacy of the people that have been before and what they've achieved. And sometimes I think we probably don't talk enough about what you do in making history and leaving legacy here and now. And if I can, I just want to just say just a few things about really the role of the leader and my relationship with Pete to illustrate what is done. And often when I talk to people, they are completely unaware of the role of a leader of a council. And in fact, Pete's family were unaware of what he did. So if I can just illustrate the kind of things that he as the leader of the council did for the city and the impact that he had. And I would start off by saying this: very few things are done by a single person. Everything we achieve generally has got a lot of people who are responsible for delivering. But one person can stop things. One person can put an end to it before it even starts. And I just want to illustrate some of the things. So I served for Pete as both a director and as a chief executive. And when I was with him as a director, when he was the new leader of the council, one of the first things the council had to face up to was austerity. All the local government sector were going to be hit with austerity. And there would be various ways you could go about it, and Pete understood from his point of view of what was the purpose of a council in supporting a strong city. And so his words to me was, we need to redesign the services that puts the residents or the citizens, customers we sometimes use, at the center of the way we redesign services, and we need to start by stripping out the bureaucracy and start to save money that way, rather than impact on the residents. And as an example of that, he forced us to do some systems mapping. What that meant in practice was mapping the experience of the residents who come in and are asking for services. And one particular lady in particular stuck out. She came in for some help with housing and benefits, and she was dealt with 34 times before she actually got the answer she wanted. We mapped it. And every one of those stages, the officers felt they were doing a good job, and we had a tick because they came in and got an answer, and it was done quickly. But they didn't get the right answer. And so what Pete said, rethink the way you design your services so they're not passed from pillar to post, and that when they come in, whether it's a housing problem or a financial problem, I want the council to address it. Why I'm saying that? The role of a leader is the what. I say to Pete, I can't do the what for you, Pete. That's your political decision. My job and our staff is to help you with the how. You need to tell us what you want. And so he was very clear. So a number of things throughout that period when he was the leader, I just want to illustrate, and so hopefully help with everybody's understanding of the role that he played in building a successful city. And there was an illustration on there with a photo with Andrew and with Pete down with the the flood defence scheme, the Environment Agency. Austerity came, a different demand on capital programme. Government said 50% must come from you locally. We'll give 50% to the Environment Agency. My planners said we need to meet the shortfall, 12 million. It was a 25 million scheme, 12.5 million. We would find it. Pete said, all our SIL would just go on the flood defence scheme. I'll tell you what you do. You put 3 million on a pot and say to the county, match it. And we'll leave the private sector find the other 6. Well, when we put the 3 million in, county matched it with 3 million. The government said, actually, no, you've done that. We don't need you to find the rest. And the government picked up the tab. Most people will be unaware of that. My officer said, pick up the whole tab, SIL. His view was that money had to go further. So that was one example. Housing, 2011-12, collapsed. Connaught, Rock, went into bankruptcy. We built 90 houses in the city. Pete said, we've got to do something about it. Bring all the managing directors of all the house builders together in a room and let's ask them the question, what are we going to do to get them to build? They said,
You're forcing us to build houses that we can't sell. 1, 2 bedrooms. The only people who can get a mortgage from the bank, remember the recession we had? The only people who get a mortgage from the bank were families with a job. We need to build 3 and 4 bedroom houses. Secondly, the affordable housing was so high we can't build. It doesn't stack up viably. We said our policy is 35%. Pete said, that's okay. 35% of nothing is nothing. 25% of something is something. We'll allow them to do 25%. So we suspended the policy. We got the house building moving. The house building started in the city. John Lewis came knocking. We wanted to land John Lewis. John Lewis said, we got doubts. What are the doubts? 2 things. The car parking is inadequate, unacceptable, not the kind of standard we would assume. And secondly, there's a 2-lane carriageway between John Lewis, where they would go, and the High Street. We got doubts about it. What would it take? If you could address those 2 things, we will come. I said to Pete, Pete, it's going to cost $2.5 million. Remember the county gave you a hospital pass about taking traffic out? It was a really difficult challenge. Pete said, we've got to find the money. Because at that time, we had high levels of vacancies. John Lewis came, the High Street, on our High Street, hasn't looked any better. I want to say this to you because you get knocked as politicians all the time, because it's really easy to knock you. When you have to take a decision like, we will find $2.5 million when people were saying you couldn't borrow because there was no capital. Our city centre, I guarantee you, this city centre would not be in the condition it was if we didn't land John Lewis on that High Street. I gave him literally an hour to make a decision because we had to get it in if we we're going to get that decision. He told me what, in his own words, of putting me in that position. He didn't like it, but he made that decision. Same thing, Rugby World Cup. Phone call comes in from Tony Rowe. Bristol's pulled out of the Rugby World Cup. Would we host? He didn't hesitate. £250,000, he needed to get it done. The big weekend, BBC wanted to host the powder run. £200,000. We didn't have the money. Spoke to Teambridge. It was going to be in their patch. Teambridge were nervous about it. Jeremy Christophers. He says the right thing to do for our youngsters. We need to find the money. We worked with them, we delivered it. What a brilliant experience. I remember the day we won the Premiership, I think, if you remember rightly, and then we came down. One of the best weekends in my life. I'm telling you now. Rugby at Twickenham, winning it, coming down, and then going to the big weekend. Our youngsters have loved it. Teambridge loved it. I was a politician. I couldn't do it as an officer. I want to give you an illustration of that. I was always saying to Pete, if the money's the objective, you can't do it, Pete. His view was, sometimes you had to do it. I said, that's okay. That's your call. As an officer, I'm saying if you want to deliver the project on time and budget, you can do it. Those are the decisions as a leader of a council he took, and you take as always as politicians, and the public are unaware of those kind of issues. Sorry, Lord, I just want to say, because this is his legacy, and I want to just say this. We talk about the swimming pool and bus station. These projects took over 20 years. I remember Chester Long was leader of the council, wanting to move the bus layover area to allow us to redevelop that, and how long that has taken. And what you're delivering there is a swimming pool passive house. That's down to him saying, this is Pete saying, I want the experience for people going into that pool to be different from what's ever been before. That you are going into a pool where the experience is you don't get temperature changes because you go in the water and it's hot, and when you come out you're freezing and you get chlorine in your eyes. I want a completely different experience. He went to Germany, he looked at it and said, I wanted to build that. That to me is what leaders do. That's what you have to do as politicians. The what? Our officers, and I take pride of our officers, we've always tried to deliver what the council said they want to do in the best way you can. But I work very closely with Pete over a decade, and I can say to you, what I saw was a remarkable person who might have not been the most articulate person, but had a tremendous sense of judgment and could read the room in a fantastic way. He could say things that no one else could say because he had a glimmer in his eye and you didn't take offense. And the number of times he called me in my car a useless driver, and I never took offense because the spirit that he did it was well-meaning. And I think I'm going to stop there because I'd like to say some things in a personal capacity at another occasion.
Pete has been a friend of mine since 1974. I want to talk a bit about the person. I first met him, I was allocated to be his conductor for a week. We used to have a different driver every week. It was a fantastic week. We got up to a few things there and then. I think the disciplinary rules would allow it. I think they're all spent now after 48 years. I knew Pete then, I got to know him, and my friendship with him sort of matured thereafter. He approached me to come along to a union meeting, identifying me as somebody who was a bit noisy in the canteen, self-opinionated, and always had something to say about nearly every matter that was going on in the company. He introduced me to join the Labour Party that year, which I did. I was an active member along with Peter. He encouraged me to stand. Don't worry, Andrew, he encouraged me to stand in Topsham in 1979. Didn't quite do it. And Peter, in 1984, Peter and myself were 2 of 14 councillors that got elected to the City Council in that time. During that period of time, Pete and I worked together within the trade union, representing bus drivers, conductors, engineering staff, clerical workers, and I like to think I learned a lot of how to talk to people, how to deal with their issues from Peter during that time. Many issues. We rose up together, we were following one another effectively. I was the branch secretary, then he became the branch secretary. I served on our union's national executive, Pete served on the union's national executive. They then got me elected as a full-time official, basically getting me out of the way, really, of the local branch. Pete worked hard, day in, day out, to represent those workers within the bus company here in Exeter. He also got himself onto the council, as you can see. I think that was in 1982 that he got elected. A couple of faces there we knew, the late Paul Oliver, Hilda Sturry, and 1 or 2 other people that we got elected in 1982. I suppose serving people in Exeter has been what Peter has done all his life. And he's continued to do that to the end, in Pete's way, by the way. A few rough edges, he'll accept that, but you knew where you stood with Pete, and that was, in my case, generally at the bar getting the next round. But apart from that, he did offer up, I can assure you. We were good friends, as many other people in this room hopefully will say he was a friend of theirs as well. So, he's got a great family, terrific support, and it's been my privilege to have known Peter and to claim him as one of my friends and he as a friend of mine. We talked about a number of great things. I dabbled with a place in Spain for a while, and I always remember, it was about 2008 I think, Labour actually for about 2 years lost control of the city, and I can remember, if you can imagine the sight of Peter and myself in a swimming pool drinking Sam Miguel. I'll leave it there, but he would talk to me about these things. He was a great confidant, and we used to talk about a lot of things. He helped me through a couple of personal situations. I could always go to him with things I needed to talk to him about on a personal basis. He was always there, and he would always tell me straight. I didn't like everything he had to tell me, by the way. But most, if not all of those things were always correct at the end of it when I came back to analyse it. So he was being a great friend to me. Very loyal. He'll tell you what he thinks of you. He cared immensely for this city. He really did. His family were proud of him, really proud of him. Secondary modern school boy, social mobility, making it through the various levels within the trade union, highly respected. And one of the pictures in there, one of you might not have noticed, was the former General Secretary of the RMT trade union, Mick Cash. That was his standing. That was his standing in the trade union movement and also within the Labour Party. Many of my friends will hopefully speak in a moment about his commitment to the Labour Party and to our cause. He certainly deserves the tributes and recognition tonight. And so, as the article in the Express and Echo said, he was a good socialist. He learned a lot, and he used the trade union, actually gave him education as it did with me, to help him through his career in the trade union, the bus company, and also the Labour Party. Pete, sometimes as you saw when I saw the bubble come out, Kareem, OMG, and Pete was like that. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He would say a lot. And he said to me, and he won't mind me saying this, quite recently, Phil, what's a misogynist? I said, Peter, you are not that. You are not a woman hater. You love your wife. You do so much. He spent so much time caring for Sylv. Sylv's been poorly. Whilst he was running the council, he was still caring and doing stuff at home. This is all sides a lot of us didn't appreciate that Pete was doing. The pressures of all of that. He'd done all that. He saw it through, together with the family. It's been a privilege to have known Peter. I call him my friend. His family are great. I hope we are all there on the day of his funeral to support the family. I wish them well. And as I said quite recently, at a passing of a great friend of mine, and now Peter, the tears will pass and we will remember the good times and the pleasure, the experiences and the lessons that he brought to us. Lord Mayor, I must stop now. I could go on. There are many stories I will recount over the periods of time with you, many of you, and you with me. And we must continue to talk about him in that way. Good times, bad times, let's talk about Pete. Remember Pete. Let's not be embarrassed to mention his name. He was great for this city. You've seen it, the vision. And I just hope that I can, together with the rest of my team, hopefully just walk a little bit in the shadow of Peter over the coming years. He deserves it. And finally, to end on, he was there to help open the bus station. I'm saddened that he will not be there on the opening of St. Sybil's Point. That was the vision. That was the vision he gave us. He saw it through when many others would have moved away from all of that a good time. I remember coming back in the car, hands-free from Cornwall. Emma and Justin ringed me, said, Phil, we've got a problem. This is when the award came back and we couldn't get it. We're worried about what Pete is going to say. I said, well, look at me. You need to talk to Pete. And Pete was there. He didn't flinch. He didn't say, let's pack up. He said, let's go on. And we can all see St. Sybil's Point coming out of the ground and will obviously be open as soon as we can get it there. I can assure you we will remember Pete. We will remember Pete at that opening, and he will be remembered for that St. Sybil's Point, for how he actually intervened in the public sector, to intervene to make sure that happened. And we'll be able to look at that year on year. And so Lord Mayor, I will end there. I just wanted to say, I don't want to say no more. I can't say no more. Well, thank you, Peter.
I have known Pete for as long as I can remember. He's always been there in a room, smoking a cigarette or laughing with my dad or sat in a car or saying something daft, and you just took him for granted. I called my brother to let him know that Pete had passed away, and he went, I always liked Pete because he looked like a Mexican bandit and he never took life too seriously. And he kind of didn't, but he really did. And I don't know how someone encompasses that in such a beautiful way, that you could have a laugh with Pete and you could be silly and he could get away with saying some terrible things. But he also could run a city council and leave a legacy as great as his. And I don't think he even noticed he'd done it. I think he left and went, I'm quite proud of what I did, but I don't think he knew what he did. And I think it's only now he's gone that we're all sitting down and people are going to talk about all his legacies. And there are swimming pools and John Lewis and IKEA and, you know, seeing through those dreams that we've had since the early 80s, you know, and staying committed. And, you know, along the way, some people got scared, including my dad, because of recessions, and he still stuck with things and got them finished. So we owe a lot to him. He is a stalwart and a legend and a true Exonian and the king of the inappropriate comment. But he believed in the city. He loved it. And the outpouring of grief we've seen, the Exeter City Football Club, thank you so very much for what you did on Saturday, because it was a fitting tribute to him to hear all those people cheer when they said his name. He was often accused of being caught in the past or being a misogynist, as Councillor Bialik put it, and I have lost track of how many times I explained to him he couldn't refer to the female members of his cabinet as the girls, and that we were women and we should be respected as such. But Pete never meant that. Do you know, he promoted me when I'd barely been in the council for 5 minutes into a role he believed I could do. And he overlooked men and he looked over women that had sat here a lot longer, and he believed in me, and I'm still here, so he must have got something right. You know, it can't have all been wrong. And he did that for other women. Rosie Denham was barely 22, I think, and newly elected, and she is without a doubt the person I aspire to be on this council. And he made that, he created her, and he had so much faith in her to create that person. He also promoted so many young people and put faith in them when people probably thought, oh, what do they know about this? Do you know, the Stephen Brimbles, the Dan Gottachalks, the Luke Sills of this world, he believed in them. And I think we overlook that when we remember the inappropriate comments that sometimes slipped out, that actually he couldn't have been less of a misogynist if he tried. But I think he sometimes quite enjoyed the wind-up that went with it. I loved fighting with Pete. It was like the best thing in the world. It's like having a row with my dad. You could really let rip and we'd shout. And I think sometimes officers would think that's not appropriate. But do you know what? As I left that meeting and we walked outside, he turned around and he went, do you need a lift home? And we'd chat about his wife or his dad or my kids. And it was over. That row was done. It was sport to a certain extent. And we'd have said our piece and we probably didn't agree. And I'm a loyal girl, so I did what I was told. But I wasn't the only loyal one. Pete was so loyal to this council, to his friends, to Phil, to my dad, to Kareem, to all of us. His loyalty was unshakable, even when he knew we'd done something wrong, which is why sometimes when we didn't agree with him, we were fiercely loyal to him too. I have some sort of funny memories of him. I've got a great picture that I'll have to give to Steve of him welly-wanging like he was throwing a Molotov cocktail at a community event. Or the way he used to buy things at fairs and fetes that he had no intention of using or keeping. My house was full of them because he'd give them to me as he left, but he wanted to support the local community event. He wanted to give to that charity. He never wanted to win the raffle, that's for sure. He loved his family fiercely, and he, as Phil said, Sylva's not always well, and I have this big lolloping greyhound, and she loved it. And every time he came into my work and Juno was there, he'd take a photo so he could take it home to show Sylv because it would make her smile. He drove his grandchildren everywhere, especially when they'd had a little too much to drink, and as they got older and learned to drive, he really enjoyed getting them to pick him up when he'd had a few too many. And driving, that was a whole other wonder. The gall of him to ever go at you, Kareem, watching him drive that bus used to terrify me. But that's how I'm going to remember shouty, arguey, funny, loyal Pete, is in that fun bus, driving into the sunshine, hitting a curb and probably crashing it slightly. We're going to miss you, Pete. You were a star.
Councillor Wiley, I mean, I think that was a touching tribute you gave, and as was the picture, and yeah, you spoke very well, and it's quite clear that I didn't know him as well as all you, and obviously we had our differences, but it is quite clear he did have vision, and I think the word that comes through long is that word service. He didn't just do service to this council, he gave service to his union, and I didn't realise he gave service to his family as well. I didn't realise he'd been caring for his wife. So that's what comes through. Commitment, dedication, service. You mentioned he's a good socialist. But I think the thing that's come through with Kareem's great touching piece is he actually made decisions. And it's all too well in today's, it's very easy not to make a decision. And I know we sometimes disagree, but he obviously had the I can't think the thing of his convictions, my brain's gone, but he made decisions and he carried them through. So he really was a leader, and it's been good to hear something. I think the one thing he's going to miss is that picture you showed me. He had his opportunity to push me in the river then, and he's not going to have it to push me in his swimming pool. Okay, so he should have taken his opportunity while he had it. So my commiserations are with the family. He died too young. I mean, nowadays that was young, and yeah. My commiserations with the family, and I'll hand over to Yolanda, who's going to say some more words.
Lord Mayor, Pete and I go back an awful long way, and I say that not with any malice, because we're on two different sides. But in fact, what annoyed me with Peter, very much so, that here he is, at the end of his life, and he's still black hair, and I've lost mine grey. And he held his. But it is quite true. Him and I think very much. Exeter is, it's our babe, if you would like to say. And I know very well that we were on different sides, and he didn't always agree. You were dead right, you know, but he would never hold it against you. Pete is clearly not known for his nutty dressing. As we know, you know, Pete can be his shirt hanging out. For God's sake, Pete, tuck your shirt in. Oh, all right, maid, he said. And he would go on, but clothes do not make the man. I would say that he had difficulty in times when he had an accident, and I went into hospital to see him, and he was there, and I laughed, and he said, "Maid, what are you laughing at?" He said, "I shall have to take more water with it next time." That was the type of thing, but he was clearly in pain because he was up here with the blown up balloons underneath, and he just looked like Michelin Man, and that's what I called him, was Michelin Man. But leadership, this is not the rite of passage to any one of us, but sometimes one just comes out of the pack. Now and again, and different times. It might be right for that particular time. Another leader will come like now and might continue on. But he had vision. The one thing that if we did argue, and you say you had your family arguments, he was always respectful, but he would have a go at me about some things, and I would have a go at him about some things. He would leave it there. He would leave it, you know, and I used to sometimes drop him home sometimes on his new home in Exeter. But leadership comes of how you deal with the oppositions, in our view, in politics. It's also how you treat what the business sector is coming that you're going to meet. How would you treat the oppositions? I can only speak as I find, and I've always spoke as I find with Pete. But he, again, was extremely passionate. And I think I do recognise what you said, Kareem, on his behalf. Something's there that I didn't know, and I do thank you for enlightening us on that. But there was difficult times when in the 2011, when the times were going to be difficult, and the decisions were difficult. Did I agree with them all? Or did we agree on this side? No, we didn't. But we had our say. But time has moved on. It's been proved that Exeter is now sort of not safe. No city is safe, but it is prosperous. What you saw in Pete when he stands in front of you is what you got. And that's what I respect of anyone. And that's all I would ask of anybody in the opposite side. God rest his soul. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Like Councillor Morse and Councillor Bialik, this is going to be a tough gig. I walked up Kingsway last week and Pete's bus was parked on the side of the road, the fun bus. And I thought of the lifts I'd had home with Lady Gaga coming out of the radio. And it did bring a lump to my throat in the same way as that video brought a lump to my throat. And I completely agree with the comments that have already been made, so I'm not going to repeat those. But like Councillor Morse, I was one of the women who were encouraged by him to take on responsibility, to stand as his deputy leader when Councillor Dilys Baldwin stood down. He had confidence in me, he had faith in me, and I thank him for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about, if you like, the more personal memories I have of him. And I'm going to start with St Sidwell's Point. There are people who are still, in a very derogatory way, and people make derogatory comments below the line in the Express and Echo, and frankly Pete never knew because he never bothered to read them, and he was quite right. But there are people who talk about Pete's paddling pool, Pete's pool. And do you know what? I think calling it Pete's pool is actually a compliment. They don't intend it that way, because Pete passionately believed that the people of Exeter deserved the best quality. He thought that the taxpayers of Exeter, who perhaps couldn't afford membership of one of the private health clubs with swimming pools, deserved to have a quality swimming pool that was of the same standard, if not better. And you know what? He's right. And we're going to enjoy using that pool, and the people of Exeter will enjoy using that pool, and the children of Exeter who learn to swim in that pool will enjoy it. And if people call it Pete's pool, well, that's fine with me. And while we were still making the decision and making those plans, there was a research trip to Germany to look at passive house standard swimming pools. And I have to say, we worked jolly hard on that trip, but we played jolly hard as well. And I think I'm going to leave it there, because what happens on tour stays on tour. And finally, the bike shed. Also late and lamented in this city, the Bike Shed Theatre. Theatre wasn't Pete's natural environment. He went to the Northcote, he went to performances, but it wouldn't have been his first choice of an evening out, as Councillor Bialik will well know. But there was one occasion, I think it was the opening of one of the festivals of local theatre, And Pete and I had both been invited, and he said he would come along, and that was great. And we agreed this, and he went, write me some words, Rach. So I dutifully, a couple of pages of neatly typed thoughts and things that I thought would be worth saying in a speech at the bike shed. We got down there. He probably skim-read it. Certainly didn't read it. But he stood up and he made a speech, and he had that bunch of mostly young theatre makers who probably didn't know him from a bar of soap. He had them in the palm of his hand. One of them said later, if that guy did a stand-up show, I'd pay to go and see it. At one point, and I was telling David Lockwood about this the other day, at one point, he looked at me and he went, are we funding this, Rach? And I went, we are actually. And he went, oh, okay then. But he loved this city. He loved everything about the city, as has already been said. And I'm going to miss him terribly. Rest in peace, Pete.
I think we all know about Pete's service to this council and the vision and his vision ambition he had for Exeter cannot be underestimated. And I think a lot of that was driven by the fact that he passionately wanted future generations to have a better start in life, to have decent, well-paid jobs, somewhere safe and secure to live. And those were really at the core of his being. I mean, I remember when I was on the executive, we had the big row about the Maths Academy, and it wasn't exactly in line with Labour Party policy. And Pete had a wonderful sort of turn of phrase, which I won't repeat, Lord Mayor, here, because I think we've got ladies and whatever present. But it was, it's good for Exeter as long as local young people who are good at maths and arithmetic and whatever would benefit from this. It didn't matter if it was an academy or whatever it was, and as we all know, it's thrived and it has done exactly what it said on the tin. But again, that was at the heart of what he wanted to do. He had a vision in a way that was very long term in some ways. It was much driven by young people. He was a passionate Exonian. I don't think he ever forgot his roots in the West Quarter. He was very proud of those and never forgot those. And he was obviously a committed trade unionist and socialist, and he was a dedicated leader of the City Council. You might not have known this, but he was actually behind the scenes a very kind and supportive person to work for. And he was also great fun. I think I would describe it that very naughty twinkle in his eye, and he would come into a room, and even whatever it was about, you knew that there was something on, or we'd tell you a funny story or whatever. And at the risk of showing my age, I can actually remember being driven in a bus by Pete Edwards. So, and at the time I wasn't a Labour councillor, I was something else, but he would always take time when I got on the bus to have a word with me and talk about what was going on at the council. And I think, again, he was an important role model for working class people going into politics and coming on the council, because with no disrespect to bus drivers or whoever, anybody in this city looking at Pete said, if I want to come on the council, it doesn't matter when I've been to university or whatever my background, if I've got the talents and the ability and I can work hard, I could become leader of the City Council. And I think that's just such an important message to send out. I did play my small role in his rise to leadership. Some of you may remember the work I did with others in Exwick, deprived the then council leader of his seat, and created a vacancy for Pete to apply for as a deputy leader. I will say what I had broken with the coalition government when my then husband and I came back to the Labour Party. We did put our toys back in the pram and bolster his position, especially as the West Ex then was a desert for the Labour Party. I think it was down to one, or if not even no seats at one point. But he never held that against me and put me on the executive. And for many years I was one of his longest serving executive members, and we did work closely on a huge range of issues and projects. I think I broadly covered housing, public realm, policing and customer services. And I think, as Karima said, I've sort of had a look back through some of the clippings and things, and you just forget how much you did. And in those days the Express and Echo was daily, so you had to feed it daily with stuff, which and now I look back and think, my God, how did we do that? But we did. But I remember some key moments. I was the portfolio holder for the public realm when the football stadium had to be renewed. And I remember going up to the football stadium, Pete and I sort of glued together, and it was like the sort of Frankenstein movie. They were all there with their pitchforks ready to sort of burn me and Pete at the stake. But we went, we took it all, it was packed, and we made the commitment to fulfil the new stadium. And I agree with Councillor Morse. I have seen the film from the occasion. It was extremely moving, and the tribute that they paid to him, because he was instrumental. I think I got considered in that process as an honorary woman, because which he often used to do to me, that I was there in name only as the portfolio holder, but it was very much Pete was doing it, and I was there as a sort of token honorary woman perhaps on that occasion, but nevertheless we got it there. I remember the year we had the severe winter weather, and the refuse lorries, we decided we couldn't take them out because it was snow everywhere, and it was a very difficult time for me, because my then father died and his wife died unexpectedly in Wales, and I was coping with that, having to travel up to Swansea. I'm an only child, so it wasn't very easy. At that time, I also had the national newspapers calling for my resignation, and I caught pneumonia as well from all of it. But nevertheless, there was a front page that I've still got at home somewhere, where it's a picture of Pete and I on the front page, and it said, "I stand by my man," because despite the Sun newspaper calling me Mr. Rubbish, he wouldn't sack me because he thought I'd made the right decision, and he stuck by me, and that was how loyal he was. If he thought that I'd done the right thing, or we'd done the right thing collectively, he would stand by me. And the famous arguments, there was one occasion when we had a meeting in the afternoon with Hazel Ball, and it was about homelessness and housing, and he came in and I could see that he was in a terrible mood, and he said, "It's all your fault," he said. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, all this homelessness and we've got it so bad in Exeter, it's your fault because you're too soft on it all, he said. He said, "Too many soup kitchens," he said, it's all wrong, he said, "It's all your fault," he said. So a huge row occurred, and it was one of the rows, as Councillor Morse said, where people start looking out of offices and thinking, what on earth is going on here? And then about half an hour, 20 minutes into it, he burst out laughing and said, "Yeah, you're right," he said, "You are right," he said, "I had a meeting with all these business people this morning, and they said that the council was too soft on it," he said, "and I wanted to test if you were doing the right things," he said. "You're quite right," he said, and it went on, because he said, "I want you to crack down on the soup kitchens," and I said, "I'm not going to close the soup kitchens. I didn't go into politics to close soup kitchens. I'm going to resign." He said, "No, you're not going to resign." He said, "It's going to be all over the Express and Echo. I'm going to look terrible." He said, though, but again, he didn't like to be surrounded by yes people. He wanted to be tested. He wanted to test me and Hazel Ball at the time, that we were doing the right things, we had the right things in place, and we were at the same time caring and inclusive. And he needed to check. That was his way of checking with us, that we weren't just sort of ticking boxes. And I think as well, I think from my point of view, my proudest achievement working with him was the housing that we built, that Kareem alluded to. In some good years, we were actually out building Plymouth and giving Bristol a run for their money with council housing. Of course, with the austerity and the cuts, that ended. But, we were really going some years, we were really making great progress. And also, a hidden side of Pete that I think not everybody knows about is he was actually a great champion and ally for the LGBT community. If he ever thought that I was being mistreated or was having a hard time, he was on that like a ton of bricks. There's no way that he would have me being mistreated like that. And he was actually, and this might surprise some of you, an early advocate for the trans community, because as Councillor Bialet will remember, at one point we had several bus drivers who had transitioned into women, and there was a famous Christmas party where one of the lady bus drivers had transitioned, and nobody would dance with her at this do. Now, Pete might not have waved a banner, but he might not have, made a speech about it, but he was the one that got up and had the first dance, because he was not having her neglected or not enjoying the occasion or being discriminated against just because she had transitioned like that. And I think that goes back to so many things. He might not have used the right language, he might not have always said the right thing, but his actions spoke for himself. And the last time I saw Pete, oddly, was in Morrison's. It's time when it was a bit more stricter social distancing, and I was in there, going around with a trolley like we do, and I suddenly heard this booming voice. "Hello, Rob," he said, bounded right up to me and gave me a hug, broke all the rules in Morrison's of social distancing and all the rest of it, because that was Pete. And he wanted, and the conversation was about how are you, what's going on, and what's new. And you know, and I was in a way I was pleased because he was full of beans the last time I saw him, which I think was a nice thing for me at least. Last year, as Lord Mayor, I was officiated at his last council meeting, and there's some fabulous photographs that have come out about that. But looking back again, that was a great honour for me, I think, to be able, on behalf of the whole council, to give him the gifts and the tokens that we gave him, and I think that was a lovely event that we did. So I will end there, Lord Mayor, but I would say Pete Edwards, much respected, much missed, and fondly remembered. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Like Yolanda, I knew Pete for a long period of time whilst I was on this council, and we had political banter. We didn't always agree. However, I always respected Pete, and I hope that he respected me too, even when we had quite a lot of disagreement. However, I will not remember Pete for what occurred in this chamber. I will remember Pete for what happened outside of it, in the working groups and the private chats that occurred, as we do with all councillors. Pete actually had a very great sense of humour, as people I've already stated, and he was also incredibly easy to get on with. And he was always willing to give advice, even when I didn't want the advice, but he would still give the advice. And he had a genuine warmth. As has already been alluded by Councillor Hannaford, I'll talk about one thing that really did touch me at the time. As many of you will know, I put down a motion a few years ago about LGBTQ+ rights in Russia. And Pete listened, and he helped to ensure that I had time to sit down with the leaders of Yaroslavl and express my concerns. I had to wait a while because they were very busy talking to Kareem and others, but when they came in, Pete brought them over and said to me, "Here you go, lad," and then just winked at me. And that was actually quite a touching moment, and then left us to enable us to have that conversation. So that proved to me, as Councillor Hannaford has stated, that he did care, despite that rough exterior that we all know, and he also had a great passion and love for this city, and that cannot be denied. Rest in peace.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've got a lot to thank Pete for, as people in the trade union movement know. I was dismissed from Devon General when I was bus driver there for trade union activities. And the person who led that campaign was Pete Edwards. And I received considerable compensation, which Pete reminded me of for years after I met him. He never said, "Hello, how are you?" He'd say, "Have you spent it yet?" And that was so typical of Pete. I'll let Unison pay their own tributes to Pete, but let's say that when I was the branch secretary, Pete did a hell of a lot for workers within Exeter City Council. One of my fondest memories and was that I had a meeting with the present leader and Pete in the Unison office one Thursday afternoon. And about 2 days later, we'd sat, and as you know, the walls of the Civic Centre are awful thin. About 2 days later, I had a phone call from the then head of HR, who wasn't particularly Unison-minded or union-minded. She said, "I'm going to have to close down the Unison office." And I said, "Oh, why is that?" And she said, "Oh, the language out there, that I've received 4 or 5 complaints." And I said, "I'll have to have a word with the leader of the council." She said, "What's it got to do with him?" And it was him that was doing most of the swearing. And that, well, you know, that's Pete, isn't it? I'm not going to say any more because I know we've got other stuff to do, but he's very fondly remembered by all of us, I'm sure. Thank you.
I first met Pete after I retired in 2007 when I was standing as a candidate for the Whipton ward. and I had the pleasure of him being a fellow councillor from that time, from 2008 to 16. Now, I was used when I was working to having to look at your words before you spoke them occasionally. Meeting with mandarins in London when I was on union business and so forth, and they could speak in an impenetrable language. Sometimes you needed a dictionary to understand what they were talking about, and that sort of thing. And I was immediately struck, compared to that, by Pete's disarming manner. And he was what I call a BFZ. That means a bull-free zone. In canvassing, which is how I got to know him really well, he was very streetwise. He was to the point with the electorate. He cut through the issues. We had a few laughs, a lot of laughs actually. It was a pleasure to work with him, and I shall miss his passing. Thank you.
I don't know Pete as long as some, but longer than others. We first met in the mid-90s when I got involved seriously in the Labour Party rather than just being what you might term a National Trust member. And Pete got elected to the council in 95 and I got elected in 96. He was chair of the group. And I realised after my first meeting that this was a man to be reckoned with when he told Chester Long to shut up, and Chester Long shut up. If you've known Chester, you'd realise that that's a rare skill. As I'm sure Emma will confirm. Shortly after that, the boundary change came in 2000 when I took my first sabbatical from the council. And I remember in the late 90s, that was early noughties actually, campaigning in Pinhoe and leafleting in Fox Road with my children. Pete came out with us. I'd like to say Pete was a huge help, but he spent more time on my son's skateboard than my son did. And he skateboarded around Fox Road while we leafleted, but the kids loved him. He was always Uncle Pete to my kids. I don't think I've ever met a kid who didn't like him. Years ago, when the Citizen used to arrive, my daughter, we're not a normal family, would get the Citizen out, spread it on the dining room table, get her coloured pens, and tick the councillors she liked. She did also put crosses against the ones she didn't like, and I wouldn't be cruel enough to mention who any of those were. But there were several opposition councillors on our like list, and at least one Labour councillor on her don't like list. But she looked for Pete first, and he got a big tick. Always. Yes, one of my first realisations of just what a serious politician Pete was, despite the twinkle in his eye, he was comedy, was when one of his early appearances on the Sunday Politics, not long after he'd been given the housing role by Chester Long. And my boss at the time was a card-carrying Tory, not the first one I had, and sadly not the last. But he came up to me at work on Monday and said, "I saw your mate on the Sunday Politics." And I thought, oh, here we go. He said, "He knows about housing, doesn't he? The bloke we put up didn't know a bloody thing." And he said, he spoke for a few minutes, I thought, oh, he's a yokel. And he said, and I realised over the space of 30 minutes that this guy was the only one of the three on the panel, and the guy asking the questions, who had the faintest idea what they were talking about. And to me, that was Pete. The more people knew him, the more they liked him. I'm still looking for my photograph to contribute to the photo wall. I've got a lovely picture from a day when we had dragon boat racing of the current leader of the council with the current leader of the county council, but the picture I treasure, that I'm still trying to find, is of one Councillor Peter Edwards, or Captain Edwards as he was in the day, or frankly as I've tweeted him as Captain Pugwash, wearing a sailor's hat and standing on the bank. My final memory of Pete was quite recent. I moved into the Herefordshire area about 10 years ago, maybe a little earlier than that actually, and I used to walk into work. Pete was sort of almost a full-time union officer at the stagecoach, but so he could not forget how to drive a bus. He used to do a school run every morning, not in the sense of driving a people carrier with 5 kids in, but driving a bus with a whole load. And he'd be driving back to the bus station as I was walking into town, and many a time he stopped, and I'd be taxied into the city centre by Pete. And again, we never talked council stuff. It was what you're doing at work, how are your kids, da-da-da. And it's not too strong a thing to say that I loved him. He was an amazing man. And I spoke to him last in July. And I didn't think this was going to happen, but I just can't really imagine a world without him. Thank you.
Unlike the other people that have spoken about Pete, I didn't know him for that long, just a few years. But there are three things that I would just like to bring to attention about Pete. First is the extra care unit at St Loy's, which is another part of his legacy. Pete wanted provision in the city for people that are in between being able to live totally independently in their own houses or going into care homes. It's not been an easy thing to work out how this is going to actually be managed, and all of that discussion is still going on at the moment between us and Devon County Council, but between both councils we're convinced it's something that we need and that we're going to do. So I'm really glad that we all decided to call it Edward's Court after Pete a while ago. So that will be one more legacy of his with regard to housing. Secondly, when I first got involved with the Labour Party and with Pete, it was through canvassing. He was always brilliant at answering the 150 questions that I had in between opening gateways and asking people how they were going to vote. I would be asking him about housing developments, planning, about the pool, all sorts of things. And he was always really, really good at trying to give me really full answers, saying, I'll talk to you more if you want to give me a ring doll. It's all right. That's another thing. The way he called us girls, or doll, you couldn't take offence because, as has already been said, he promoted young people, people from the LG, I always get it wrong, sorry. Thank you. Women, for him, he just wanted to see people doing a good job, people that would challenge and that would work hard. So I never minded him calling me doll, it was quite funny. Snap decisions that I thought he was making, when I got to know him, I realised behind that there was an awful lot of informed and considered decision making. He really knew his stuff. He would give a bit of bluster, and you'd think, who is this guy that's just charging ahead and everyone had to follow in his wake? But the bluster, he told me fairly recently, was to cover up the fact that sometimes he felt he may be judged because he hadn't gone to university, because people might think he wasn't as educated as he should be in this position. I found that a bit of an insight. I loved his bluster, his quick decision making. Thank you for that, Pete. He rang me up one day and said, Dole, I want you to replace Anna on the executive in charge of housing. And I'd only been a councillor for 6 months. I said, there's no way, I can't do that. And I'm gobby, I'm gobby. He said, yeah, it's what I want. Start tomorrow and put the phone down. Which some people may not think was a democratic decision, but I'm thanking him for it. So condolences to his family. He was a big bloke with a big heart and a big sense of humour, but incredibly, incredibly good at the job he did. Rest in peace, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you. I just think I should speak on behalf of the many young councillors that have been promoted through the Labour Party and encouraged by Pete. I was only 20 years old when I was elected when I was 19, but at the age of 20 I got a call saying, can you come on the executive? And I said, Pete, I can't, I'm a second year at university. And he said, right, okay, don't do that, but you've got to be a chair of a scrutiny. And I said, right, okay, I could probably manage that one. And without him, I wouldn't have probably been involved so much in the Labour Party as I have been over the last 6 years. He is someone who I think we should all model as politicians. He had great authenticity, and I think in the political world, particularly at the moment, we lack authenticity and realness, and Pete was a genuine guy who genuinely cared about other people and the people he represented, and I think politicians, particularly at the moment, should look to behave more like that. He also made politics fun, which sounds difficult, but he did. Being in a meeting with Pete was not just entertaining, but also enlightening. And I've got many fond memories of Pete making faux pas around the table. And I also think something we also lack is people being comfortable around people who might disagree with them. And I'll always remember I was chair of a scrutiny at the time when the Clifton, I don't really want to mention it, but the Clifton Hill issue had come up, and our scrutiny had made it quite clear that we disagreed with what the executive wanted to say, and I had to ring him up as a member of his own group, and I said, Pete, I've got to go to a call in, I've got to call in your decision and disagree basically. And he said, do what the F you want, mate. And that was Pete, you know. I don't think many leaders of a council would be that encouraging of disagreement, but I think it actually probably helped make the right decision in the end. He was definitely a friend of the LGBT community. He always called me Lukey Babe. And I have lots of fond memories of him, and I think he is someone that politicians today should certainly look up to and model their behaviour on. He was a formidable force, a great character, and will be sorely missed. And I am pleased his legacy will live on with projects and you know, the great tributes that we've heard this evening. So thank you, Pete, for many reasons.